The opening reveals an America that can no longer sustain the narrative of permanent prosperity that shaped its imagination for generations. What emerges now from the big cities and their surroundings is an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the distant echo of cars crossing empty avenues, as if all vitality had been slowly drained away without fanfare, until only the shell of a country trying to preserve an image that no longer corresponds to reality remains. The camera pans across. Abandoned shop windows, facades marked by time, and parking lots where families improvise their nights inside cramped vehicles, exposing a reality hidden beneath the polished surface of official speeches. The nation that once sold the world the promise of unlimited reinvention now shows signs of profound saturation, as if the collective effort had reached its limit without any guarantee of return. The urban landscape reveals more than economic decline. It reveals an emotional exhaustion, accumulated over years, perceptible in the accounts of workers who dedicate the entire month to an exhausting routine, only to find that they cannot afford the basics, resorting to loans, temporary jobs, and run-down motels while trying to maintain some dignity. Closed schools, hospitals operating at their limit, and empty shopping malls compose a picture that directly contradicts the historical discourse of continuous abundance. And the more these scenes are repeated from one state to another, the more evident it becomes that something structural is falling apart before everyone's eyes, even if few are willing to admit it. The question that remains, inevitable and urgent, is the one that guides the rest of this research. What is really happening inside America, and why does this truth remain so well hidden? Before we move on to the next revelations, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This strengthens this investigation and helps our work reach more people who also need to understand what is happening behind the image of the United States. Stay with us, because what comes next delves even deeper into this truth. What is beginning to emerge behind the stagnant landscapes is a set of signs that repeat themselves with almost mathematical precision in different parts of the country, as if the same invisible force were pushing entire communities down a path of inevitable decline. In several medium-sized cities, where factories once thrived and entire neighborhoods were built around industrial employment, now abandoned warehouses, empty parking lots, and streets that seem to have lost the natural flow of daily life are appearing, revealing that the local dynamic has been abruptly disrupted. These once vibrant spaces have become symbols of a system that has failed to adapt to the economic and social transformations that have accumulated over the last few decades. The deterioration is also evident in the growing number of families who, despite being employed, can no longer maintain a minimum standard of living. Workers who accumulate exhausting work hours discover, at the end of the month, that the amount received barely covers rent, basic food, and essential expenses, leading many to seek help in crowded food banks where lines stretch for blocks. Dependence on this type of assistance is no longer limited to the unemployed. It reaches professionals in diverse areas, including public services and sectors considered stable, highlighting a structural fragility that was previously disguised by the narrative of continuous prosperity. Smaller cities, especially in the interior of the United States, face another alarming phenomenon: population decline. Young people migrate in search of opportunities that no longer exist in their regions of origin, while those who remain cope with reduced basic services, underfunded hospitals, schools closing entire classes, and businesses that survive only out of tradition. This decline creates a self-reinforcing domino effect. The fewer people who remain, the fewer resources arrive. The fewer resources arrive, the faster the exodus. At the same time, neighborhoods in large metropolises exhibit intense contrasts, with luxury skyscrapers side by side with makeshift tents multiplying under viaducts and sidewalks, demonstrating that inequality has ceased to be an abstract concept and has begun to shape the urban landscape in a visible and unsettling way. The progression of these symptoms, so distinct and yet so interconnected, raises a question that puts pressure on the official narrative and opens space for an even more disturbing interpretation. What if these signs represent not just consequences, but indications of something deliberately hidden? As symptoms accumulate and become visible in virtually every region of the country, the need arises to understand why a territory that had established itself as a global symbol of economic stability and social ascension has so abruptly begun to face such profound erosion of its essential structures. This process stems not only from recent events, but from a series of decisions made over the last few decades, guided by corporate interests, political pressures, and financial mechanisms that have silently shifted the burden of the crises onto the most vulnerable segments of the population. The economic logic that fueled American growth in the last century has transformed into a highly concentrated model, in which a few corporations have come to control entire sectors of the economy, reducing competition and gradually but steadily increasing the cost of living. This movement coincides with policies that favored speculative investments at the expense of productive work, generating a mechanism that benefits from permanent inflation, stagnant wages, and the continuous indebtedness of the middle class. Meanwhile, increasing automation is replacing jobs previously considered stable, deepening the gap between the discourse of progress and the reality faced by ordinary families. Another often overlooked factor is how real estate speculation has transformed housing into a luxury product, raising the cost of housing to unsustainable levels and displacing residents from entire regions, which end up being absorbed by investors seeking quick profits. This phenomenon directly contributes to the increase in people living in precarious conditions, even when employed, and fuels internal migration that destabilizes already fragile communities. Meanwhile, the political system, fragmented by ideological disputes and corporate influences, has lost the capacity to respond effectively to the urgent demands of society, resulting in policies that patch the problem without ever addressing its root cause. The combination of corporate decisions, speculation, inequality, and a weakened government creates a scenario in which the population perceives that it is working more and more while receiving less and less. And it is precisely when we observe this mechanism operating so precisely and silently that an inevitable question arises, capable of completely altering how the crisis is interpreted. What if what's happening isn't just economic downturn, but the harbinger of a much broader collapse than it appears? When the signs cease to appear as isolated events and begin to form a pattern that repeats itself in different states, it becomes evident that the crisis has reached a stage where its consequences surpass any projection formulated by experts in recent decades. Entire cities begin to slowly disappear, not due to sudden natural disasters, but due to the progressive exodus of residents who can no longer sustain their own existence in regions where the local economy has silently collapsed. The closure of factories, the reduction of essential services, and the absence of investment have transformed these areas into shadows of their former selves, with empty streets that, at night, evoke a feeling of permanent abandonment, as if vitality had been gradually drained until only a worn-out outline of what they once were remains. This transformation doesn't just affect the urban landscape. It profoundly compromises the social structure, as communities that depended on support networks, small businesses, and local jobs begin to face a process of disintegration that happens point by point. Hospitals that once served thousands of people reduce staff and close entire units, generating waiting times that put lives at risk. Schools lose teachers, students, and resources, creating a cycle in which education weakens precisely in the regions that need it most as a path to upward mobility. In metropolitan areas, the impact takes on a different, but no less devastating form. The rising cost of living forces families to overcrowded suburbs, while the urban center becomes inaccessible to the workers who keep the city running, widening inequalities that now manifest themselves openly in makeshift tents and vehicles used as permanent housing. Crime, previously seen as a localized phenomenon, begins to spread unpredictably, following the involuntary displacement of populations pressured by extreme poverty. Meanwhile, entire families face impossible dilemmas, as the cost of surviving rises faster than their ability to adapt. Parents take on multiple jobs, young people postpone life plans, and the elderly realize their savings no longer cover basic expenses. In this scenario, the feeling of stability dissolves as if it never existed. Faced with this reality that is unfolding with unsettling precision, an inevitable question arises. What happens when the collapse ceases to affect specific regions and begins to redefine people's very relationship with modern life? As the material consequences become evident, an even more unsettling phenomenon begins to silently reveal itself in the daily lives of Americans. The emotional transformation of a population that, even surrounded by advanced technology and modern conveniences, experiences a growing sense of isolation, mental exhaustion, and loss of purpose. This subjective crisis does not arise suddenly. It settles in gradually, like a weight that accumulates until the individual realizes that daily tasks have lost meaning, shifting the economic problem to an existential dimension that affects all social classes. In urban centers, apartments illuminated by screens expose the contrast between material comfort and profound loneliness, showing that hyperconnectivity has failed to fill the emotional void spreading throughout society. Workers face long hours and constant pressure for productivity, which reduces rest time, weakens bonds, and transforms daily life into a sequence of mechanical obligations. Among young people, the feeling of stagnation is growing, as many postpone life plans because they do not see an accessible future, walking through cities with the impression of being spectators of their own existence. In the suburbs, quiet streets conceal families burdened by ever-increasing expenses and individualized routines that dissolve community ties. The emotional emptiness, coupled with material decline, reveals that the crisis is not only corroding the economy, but also the psychological foundation of the country. And it is at this point that an even more disturbing fact emerges, capable of showing the true depth of this silent collapse. By observing everyday reality through accounts, images, and testimonies, it becomes possible to recognize an atmosphere of fragility that permeates different regions of the United States. However, it is only by examining official figures, often presented in a fragmented way or diluted in technical reports, that one understands the true depth of the ongoing collapse. The data reveal a country that, despite declaring itself economically sound, lives with levels of material insecurity higher than those of widely documented periods of crisis, as if the nation were experiencing a silent depression that advances while most of the population tries to preserve appearances. Millions of people currently depend on food banks operating above capacity, serving working families who cannot afford basic necessities. The number of indebted citizens has reached alarming levels, with a large portion unable to cope with even the most basic financial emergencies, demonstrating that the traditional model of stability has ceased to exist for a significant part of society. There is also a growing number of workers who, even those employed full-time, resort to temporary shelters or sleep in their vehicles due to the inaccessible cost of housing. Meanwhile, official records show a continuous decline in life expectancy in some regions, driven by economic stress, poverty-related illnesses, and lack of access to healthcare. The population decline in small towns reflects forced migration that breaks community ties and profoundly alters local dynamics. These figures, when analyzed together, reveal a much broader systemic deterioration than suggested by discourses of stability. Given this scenario, an inevitable question arises. What will the future hold for a society that shows such clear signs of breakdown even before admitting it is collapsing? As the numbers reveal dimensions previously distorted by the official narrative, it becomes evident that the country is approaching a point where small ruptures accumulated over decades can, at any moment, converge into a much broader scenario of instability. This risk arises not only from the visible economic deterioration on the streets, but from the combination of growing inequality, loss of institutional trust, and emotional exhaustion, elements that together create an atmosphere in which any additional crisis can act as a trigger for profound and unpredictable transformations. American society, once accustomed to seeing itself as immune to major internal collapses, is beginning to face the discomfort of realizing that it no longer fully controls its own destiny. Experts warn that if the current trajectory continues, the coming years could be marked by successive waves of instability, affecting everything from food security to the functioning of basic services, including social conflicts fueled by competition for increasingly scarce resources. Extreme pressure on the working class is likely to intensify as the combination of persistent inflation, stagnant wages and unaffordable housing transforms survival into a daily challenge, pushing the idea of progress further and further into the distance. These factors, when observed simultaneously, indicate that the country is approaching a new stage of the crisis, deeper and more comprehensive than previous ones. Another point of tension arises in the national infrastructure, which is aging faster than it is being renewed, creating failures that are beginning to appear continuously inessential. Systems such as transportation, energy, communication, and supply. Any significant disruption in these sectors can trigger chain reactions that the already emotionally fragile population would have enormous difficulty coping with. At the same time, political analysts observe that increasing polarization weakens the government's capacity for response, reducing the efficiency of emergency actions and amplifying the feeling of helplessness. These elements converge on a disturbing question, which hangs over the country's future like a silently growing shadow. What happens when an entire nation realizes it's much closer to the breaking point than it thought, and discovers this too late to react? When one observes the sum of all the elements that shape the current reality of the United States, it becomes evident that the collapse is not manifested only in alarming statistics or images of silent streets, but primarily in the gradual loss of a society's ability to recognize its own fragility. The American dream, which for decades functioned as a narrative of hope, mobility, and reward, seems to have been emptied not in a single moment, but over years in which efforts ceased to produce stability, and the promise of upward mobility became an exception restricted to a few. The crisis, therefore, is not limited to what is visible. It settles in the intimate space between what is believed to be possible and what reality insists on denying. This symbolic rupture becomes clearer when one realizes that a large part of the population lives in a constant state of alert, as if silently awaiting a future they can no longer optimistically imagine. People have learned to normalize instability, to cope with uncertainties that previously seemed inconceivable, and to accept that progress may no longer be within reach for most. This collective feeling of emotional exhaustion, coupled with material difficulties that intensify each year, suggests that the country is facing a transition that could permanently redefine its national identity. And yet, despite the gravity of the moment, there is an essential step that can only be taken when the silence is broken, recognizing that the crisis is underway and that ignoring it will not make it disappear. The real challenge lies not only in understanding what has already been lost, but in admitting that the future will depend on the willingness to face uncomfortable truths without resorting to the illusions that have sustained decades of collective denial. If you believe that these reflections need to reach more people, and that understanding what is happening is the first step to not being surprised by the future, subscribe to the channel now and activate notifications to follow each new chapter of this investigation.